Hey Apartment Therapy, I'm Rosie and welcome to my 490 square foot apartment in London.
So the apartment actually technically spans 4 levels. On the main floor, you've got the living room and the kitchen area. And then down a flight of stairs, you've got the bedroom. And then up another flight, you've got the bathroom. And then a few more to reach the mezzanine area.
I'm a director and a content creator and previously worked in the world of TV and film casting. So I live in a Victorian mansion building, which means there's a lot of historic charm. The floors are very uneven, which means literally if you put like a toy car or something down, they whiz all the way down to the other end. So there was a lot of kind of uneven surfaces that I needed to work with. When I first also moved into the flat, it was very much a blank canvas. Nothing was here that you see. There were loads of very dull grey carpets that were very worn, a lot of very rusty old storage that needed replacing. And it genuinely just needed quite a lot of love and sort of cleaning up with all of its tattered edges. But I fell in love with the place because I knew that it had so much potential. The ceilings are super, super high, which means that it lets loads and loads of natural light in. So glorious in the summer when the sun's shining through. The height means that there's this really fun mezzanine level of the space that also makes for a kind of very fun interaction of different levels. So I knew that it would be a fantastic space when I brought my sense of personality and decor in. So when I was thinking about what to do with the space, I went through loads of different ideas. I think for me, it was really important to sit with lots of different directions before I made a final decision and kind of committed to that. So initially I thought maybe I could do a kind of smaller bookcase along the edge of the mezzanine with the ladder leading up that way and potentially block off the mezzanine as another room, because in London, having kind of multiple bedrooms can definitely heighten the value of a property. But actually it would have been such a shame to kind of cut off all of the light that the mezzanine gets by blocking it off, and really you wouldn't get that much space by doing it anyway. So that was kind of that idea gone. But actually this wall is such a statement feature. It's the first wall you see as soon as you enter the space. So I felt like it would be such a shame not to make the use of the height and the kind of blank canvas that I had on offer here. So I decided in the end to build a huge bookshelf on this wall, which is such a statement piece as you walk into the apartment. It means I could store all of my kind of books and antique pieces, but also have loads of hidden storage for kind of things that I didn't want to see. And actually the flat doesn't have that much storage, so it was perfect to have all of that kind of neatly stowed away underneath the unit. And I also decided to build a ladder, which essentially means you can climb up the entire wall and really, really make use of kind of all of the space that the wall has to offer. So the first step in conceptualizing the bookcase project was to sketch out a design. And I'm actually also a very kind of avid designer as well. So I sketched out quite a detailed design of what I thought I wanted the bookcase to look like. But it was only really when I started working with this incredible carpentry team that they really helped kind of bring that detailed eye to the design. So they thought about really clever things like putting notches in all of the shelves so that cables could feed up and I could have lamps in the unit. All of the shelves are also adjustable, so I could sort of move things around as I needed to. So they helped me really think about all of the details of the unit, as well as, of course, making sure it's super safe. And that process took kind of a few different rounds of edits. So I sent them the initial design, they then came back with their feedback, and we worked to kind of fine tune the design until it was time for installation. And then, of course, I really, really enjoyed filling the bookcase with all of my favorite things, thinking about the curation, you know, making sure there were loads of different objects and books and plants, just to really kind of make the most of the unit. I wanted to have everything feeling quite eclectic, not cluttered. So that meant really thinking about, okay, my books are going to go up here, but I'm going to keep it feeling quite loose, quite fluid. And then I wanted plants kind of punctuating the bookcase throughout. So I've got most of them right along the top there to kind of cover the bit of blank wall that sat above the bookcase. And then when it came to actually curating all of my objects, I thought really heavily about this. And I tried to, for the most part, use what's called the triangle approach, which is basically when you have a weighting on one side. So you might have a vase with a smaller little box, or you might just have something really striking in the center. But essentially you're creating this sort of either a triangular approach in the center or a triangular approach with one side being weighted, which I think just gives a really nice fluidity to all of the ways that the objects are sitting on the shelves. So when I was thinking about the space, because it's so small, I really wanted to make sure I was bringing a lot of levity and brightness in as much as I could. And so for me, birch plywood was a really great choice. I love the kind of Scandinavian finish it brings. I think because I love vintage aesthetics and I have a lot of antiques, birch plywood brings this kind of contemporary anchor point to the visual aesthetic of the apartment. And I think it helps ground everything in quite a clean, sort of simple way. And I actually bounced off the birch plywood of the bookcase and decided to use it throughout the rest of the apartment. So I've got birch plywood fronts in the kitchen. I used lighter wood dowels to replace the rails in the staircase. I used birch plywood in the mezzanine. So I wanted this really cohesive kind of language throughout the whole space that I think that really achieved. So I really wanted to zone out the space of my apartment. When I first moved in, it was kind of a bit of a free-for-all and there wasn't really a sense of kind of different spaces and different rooms. So the way I did that in the living room is I anchored the space with a rug first and foremost to kind of zone off the space from the kitchen. And I think the rug brings a really nice kind of pop of cold to contrast to all the warm tones that are going on in the space. Obviously, there's a lot of wood tones. I have a bright yellow Togo sofa. So the blue of the rug, I think, acts as a really nice contrast just to keep everything feeling balanced. So I feel like my most justified splurge is probably my Togo sofa because they are a little bit on the pricey side. But I only had so many options when it came to the sofa, and I think it's an investment piece. I'm gonna have that Togo with me for the rest of my life, and it brings so much character and personality into the space. I think it's also a really nice versatile piece of furniture that can kind of be moved around. And I think when you have a small space, it's really nice to have versatile pieces of furniture that can make for quite a flexible living arrangement. In terms of my biggest unjustified splurge, I'd probably say one of my vintage signage pieces, because I think sometimes people don't quite understand that I'm spending money on like an old vintage advertising sign. But for me, I think that's such an amazing piece of history. That's such a unique decor piece. It's bringing so much into the space that I could not find anywhere else. So whilst it confuses some people, I think I know in myself that it's a cool spend. I also built the coffee table myself with glass bricks, which was a big labor of love. And actually, if you look closely, you can see some remnants of masking tape that I accidentally glued into the table itself, which is cool. But it's just a reminder that, you know, when you DIY items in your home, it's beautiful that they're imperfect. And so I absolutely love this table. I have a little Wes Anderson kind of display on top of it with some of my favorite coffee table books, photography books, antiques, cameras, that kind of thing. And because there's not really that much space, I was very selective about the pieces of furniture in the living area. So I only have a small sofa, a little armchair, and a footstool that has some extra storage in as well, just to keep the space feeling as kind of non-cluttered as possible and quite curated. So when I first moved into the apartment, there was really no sense of entryway. So I really wanted to bring that sense of entryway into the space. And I did that through a couple of ways. So firstly, I worked with the carpenter that I worked with on the bookcase to create this unit that is wheelable. So I can move it around the space if I want to. It can become a kitchen island if I desire. And that unit has space for lots of shoes. So I can take off my shoes when I come in. I can pop them in the unit. I can drop my keys in a little bowl on that unit as well. And it just makes for quite a nice separation of space between the living area and the door. And then on the other side of the door, I built up a fridge, freezer, microwave tower in the kitchen. Beforehand, there was just a half-size fridge and it really wasn't enough space. So that was a great way to kind of mirror the entryway unit and create a bit of a kind of funnel into the space. but to also practically bring more space for appliances and storage into the kitchen as well. To zhuzh up the entryway, I also then added this amazing old butcher's sign, and it's huge, and I got it at an antique fair. And it basically just conceals all of the wood from the microwave tower and makes for quite a fun and colourful piece of art in the entryway, which I love. So I really wanted to make the kitchen more of an efficient space and utilise every nook and cranny, which I didn't feel like the previous kitchen really did. I then really wanted to use the corner space by getting the storage to go all the way back, as well as small slivers of space like under the oven or next to the microwave. And those little spaces are really great for things like chopping boards and baking trays and things like that. And in the same vein as wanting to bring more kind of brightness and levity into the space, I wanted to replace the bulky upper kitchen cabinetry that was there beforehand. And I opted for some open shelving, which still allows me to have lots of storage for my crockery and jars of food. But I just think it's more fun to see those items, and it just feels a little less heavy. I like that I can see kind of my vintage glassware, my Coca-Cola crate. There's just some fun, characterful antique pieces up there that I think, again, really bring that sense of character into the space and kind of a continuation of the living area. So aesthetically in the kitchen, I really wanted to go for this kind of 50s Americana diner inspired look. And so a big part of that for me was creating a really striking checkerboard backsplash. And I actually used tiles that were left over from my bathroom renovation because I went for a very simple square white tile in there. And because I think it's really important to kind of use what you have and not waste materials, it was an obvious choice for me to reuse those tiles in the kitchen. And so I actually decided to get some tile spray paint and spray paint half the tiles in this lighter blue color. So I have this beautiful kind of chalky blue and white checkerboard effect. And this is kind of inspired by my previous rented apartment, which was actually also in the same building that I'm living in now. And I did a kind of renter-friendly DIY beforehand where I got tile stickers and I created the checkerboard backsplash feel. So it's really cool to be able to do a similar feel, but in a more concrete way and kind of have that be a staple of my kitchen. And I have to say the DIY tile backsplash was truly not for the faint-hearted. I was outside in sort of minus temperatures in November, in the dark, spray painting these tiles, having to bring them all the way back up to my flat in between drying times, bring them all out again, do more coats, bring them in. And I made the silly mistake of also leaving some of my tiles drying in piles, which meant that of course some of them stuck together and weren't usable. But luckily I spray painted just enough to make sure the backsplash was working. And whenever I see the backsplash now, it just reminds me what a labor of love it was to actually make it happen. The bathroom was a bit of a botched job, honestly, when I first moved in. It had just been done really badly. There were holes in the tiles, there was rust, there was peeling plaster and paint. So I knew I wanted to give it a bit of a facelift. And essentially I decided to go for a very Wes Anderson inspired feel in there. So keeping it quite clean, simple and symmetrical, but with bold pops of color and character. So I went for a simple square white tile, but with a light yellow grout, which just really punctuates and kind of is an extension of a light yellow ceiling that I opted for in there. And this was actually a point of contention with my builder because he was actually very confused about my design choices in there. And there was one particular thing I wanted to do in there that he didn't agree with, which was that I wanted the tiles to kind of stop just before the edge of the ceiling so that I could bring the light yellow of the ceiling sort of down into the tops of the walls and create sort of like a bleed over ceiling color. And he was very confused why we weren't taking the tiles to the very top of the walls. And I think that was just something I sort of stuck to my guns on because I'd seen inspiration in books and online of people doing this tiled approach. And so I knew it was workable. And I think that's a prime example of when it's of course always worth listening to the advice of your tradespeople because at the end of the day, they're experts in what they do. But I think sometimes it's working out what is fundamental and what is simply an aesthetic clash. What is their taste versus my taste? And how can you kind of filter what needs to be done versus what you would like to do. So I think that was a great lesson for me in kind of really sticking to my vision, having a conversation with him, explaining why it could work. And I've never had a problem with the tiles being slightly below the ceiling since. It's been fantastic in there and it's really worked for me. And something that I also really wanted to do was to add some decor into my bathroom to create a little gallery wall, really make the most of this open shelving that I've got in there, and just make it a really creative, fun space to be in, because it's so small that I think actually by adding that injection of personality, when I'm getting ready in the morning, I do feel really excited for the day. I feel very creatively fueled, and it's just a happy space. I think yellow is a happy color. So the space is very small, but in terms of storage options, I do have my boiler just sat behind the door, which also incorporates the washing machine in that space as well. And I actually love that the washing machine is not in the kitchen. It's kind of very out the way and sort of hidden there. I think it works perfectly. And then luckily, I also had this really nice open shelving alcove, which means as well as decor pieces, I can also store little colored crates full of things like moisturizer, toothpicks, just very practical kind of everyday bathroom items. But I think storing everything in colorful storage boxes, again, just really makes the space feel very intentional, very curated. The palette of blue and yellow is very thought through, and a very classic Wes Anderson palette as well. For me, lighting is also really important in a bathroom. I think it's often overlooked, but I really wanted the space to feel like a spa. So I actually talked to my builder about installing some strip lighting in the shower shelves that we installed, which means that I get this lovely glow in the evenings. And I also have just a very simple IKEA wall light in there as well. And I think having the wall light and the strip lights together really makes for this very calming feel, which is just a perfect atmosphere to have in the evenings when you're winding down and getting ready for bed. So what's really funky about the apartment is it actually has 4 different levels. And so the bedroom is actually down some stairs by the kitchen and is a little kind of offshoot of the building. So it remains quite cool in there in the summer, which is really nice. And because it's such a small space, there was only so much that could be achieved in there. So to really lean into that small cocooning, cozy feel, I decided to color drench the whole space in a sort of light sage green, which alongside the tree that is just outside the window adds a really nice kind of natural calming feel in there. And I think the goal for me in the bedroom was to keep it feeling cohesive in terms of its visual language with the rest of the apartment, but way more stripped back, because ultimately the bedroom for me is a place to relax, wind down. So in the bedroom and up the stairway and in the mezzanine, there was kind of this really dull old grey carpet that I knew I wanted to rip out. And in the bedroom, I was so lucky to have original floorboards. And if you live in London, it's always such a fun moment when you start taking up the carpet and you really hope there's some original tiles under there or floorboards, because honestly, Victorian original features are so desirable and just add so much charm to a space. So we sanded those back, put a fresh coat of varnish on there, and then I popped a rug in there as well, just to keep it feeling really cozy. So I've also been very curated about the art in there. There are just 2 pieces. One is a really cool old vintage poster from a diner that's just 2 ice creams, and it would have been cut up and put in kind of menu cases and things like that in a diner, which I think is really cool. And the other piece is called I Don't Want to Go to Work Today, and it's just a girl kind of like slumping. And for me, that's just every day brings me joy and laughter. And those 2 pieces of art are also red and pink toned, which I think works really nicely with the green. So something that's a really big part of my identity is vintage clothing, but I do make sure to always filter through my wardrobe to check that everything in there is really relevant to my style at this point in time. And if it's not, I can just go and sell it back to antique dealer friends or people that would also be able to sell on the clothes and appreciate their value and their kind of worth as special antique pieces. In terms of storage for my clothes, I have 3 ways that I store my clothes. I have an amazing clothes rail that sits flush against the wall and has fold-in-half hangers for all of my vintage tops and shirts specifically, and that they weren't kind of folded away under the bed where they would get really crinkled and creased. So the fold-in-half hanger storage works super well for kind of all my jumpers and tops and shirts. I also built out storage under the small stairs that lead down into the bedroom, and I store all of my trousers in there. And then I, of course, have boxes under the bed, which I feel like is a very classic small space storage hack. And all the rest of my clothes are just in there. Things like pajamas and underwear, jumpers, bulky items as well. And that just goes really neatly under the bed, where it doesn't really matter if they're kind of a little bit bunched up down there. So I think the key thing for me is just always keeping my wardrobe in check, making sure that all the pieces in there are still pieces that I absolutely adore. And if they're not, then they can go on to another home. That's the question that kind of resurfaces. It's like, okay, will this actually help me feel a bit calmer by having less stuff and less clutter if I actually get rid of this piece? I find it actually more helpful day to day to have quite a curated wardrobe so that I'm also not paralyzed by choice every morning. So I wanted my mezzanine space to achieve a variety of functions. I wanted a spare sleeping area up there that I could use for guests and friends, but also that could kind of be like a daybed, sofa, place to hang out in the day as well. I wanted a space to work, so I designed this pull-out desk that can basically be stowed away when not in use and be pulled out when I just want another place to work and kind of keep my work stuff away and outside of my usual day-to-day living. I also wanted more storage up there, so I designed a small wardrobe, storage under the bed, and some open shelving as well, just to, again, provide a lot of options for different items that you might need to store. So for example, I can store bulkier things like suitcases up there, drying racks, spare bedding, fans for the summer, and it just acts as really good storage for those bulkier, more annoying items that you want out of sight. I also have this weird little alcove in the mezzanine that I wasn't sure what to do with. I ideated on a few different ways I could use it, but because I make lots of art, I have an art shop, I wanted a place for all of my printing supplies and my printer. And so that felt like the perfect place to kind of tuck all of that away neatly in a nice wooden box that again can also be movable, it's on wheels. So it could also be used as a little coffee table type thing with the daybed as well. So it was just thinking about how the space could be really flexible and versatile and cover off a lot of different functions, because beforehand there were just some dull grey carpets up there, a really squeaky rusted wardrobe that honestly was so unusable and inefficient, and I just knew the space could be utilised way more effectively, which I feel like I've achieved. I think a happy, healthy home is all about being comfortable with growth and evolution. In my previous space, the palette was a bit brighter, for example, and I still had a lot of my quirky items, but I think my taste has definitely evolved. And in this space, I definitely wanted to lean more into a bit of a Scandinavian feel as well. I wanted to have some slightly more muted tones to make the space feel quite grounded as well as characterful. So I think it's being able to change when you feel that you're changing. It's okay if you need to settle into your space a bit more to find those things, and those can come later. But I think ultimately it's being able to ebb and flow with your own stylistic shifts. I would say that anything can be home decor. Anything can actually be home decor. There are no rules. If I want to have a 1950s chocolate packaging up on my wall, I'm gonna do it. If I want to have my dad's vintage travel guides up on my bookshelf and treat them as highly prized books, I'm gonna do it. If I want to bring vintage milk bottles with advertising slogans on the front in as vases, that sounds great. Not being afraid to break rules and not being afraid to appreciate beautiful items and objects and find a way to bring them into your home as decor pieces. Truly, you can do anything with your space, and it's just about thinking creatively. I think home for me needs to cover a range of functions. So of course, practically it needs to work day to day with your lifestyle and routine and be an efficient space in terms of how you live and what you need to use the space for. But I think at the end of the day, home for me is all about mood and atmosphere. It's a place where I want to be able to express myself authentically, be surrounded by items that bring me joy, and ultimately be both creatively fueled and relaxed by my space. I think I've learned to listen to my gut, because I think I have quite quirky taste sometimes. Like some of the decor pieces that I love, for example, being you know, graphic advertising from the 50s would not be to everyone's taste. You know, they're quite striking items. But I think that's okay. And I think sometimes it's just being sure of your own taste. And I think that just comes with going to lots of antique fairs, going to lots of markets, being surrounded by a mishmash of random items. That really helps you understand that there's loads of variety and difference out there. Not everything has to look a certain way. Once you've kind of mastered or begin to master that feeling of taste, it's much easier to make decisions because you're not thinking about what will the internet think, what will my friends think, is that trendy, is that cool? You're just thinking, does that item bring me joy? Is it exciting? Is it interesting? And if it's all of those things, then great.